Hello, today I'm joined by our CFO, John Cunningham. Today we wanted to discuss valuation. It's a topic that's relevant for sure in any sort of merger, acquisition, anytime a business is being bought or sold, but it's also really relevant when there's any sort of discussion that management's going to have with investors or with any lenders. So today, I think we need to cover three key questions in understanding valuation and value drivers and what drives value in a business. What they are is simply, what is value? It's an important question to ask, I would think. Also, how can it be measured? And finally, what adds or subtracts value? So the first question is, what is value? I think we would say value is pretty subjective. It's a matter of perspective. But the relevant perspective is that of the buyer, the lender, or the investor. We all might have some sense of what we think the value of our business is, but somebody else's perspective is the one that's going to have perhaps the greatest influence. So one definition of value is the economic benefit received discounted by the cost of acquiring it. There's certainly different types of value and valuation. John, as a CPA, I think you're more than qualified to speak to different types of value and valuation methods. What are some of those that might be relevant?
You're exactly right. There are a number of different methods for valuing a business. And one of just going through a laundry list: fair market value, investment value, fair value, statute fair value, intrinsic value, book value, synergistic value, value in gold coins. But there's several that are considered more formalized, that are used in the market for when a transaction is about to occur. Jared, would you like to go through a couple of those?
Sure. There's three main valuation methods that I think we see most of the time. And I think it's worth pointing out that good questions are maybe the number one lever that managers and investors use to understand what the value is. It's really as simple as that. Asking important questions relevant to that business that really get at the heart of operations. That is, as simple as it is, I think it's really overlooked. Overlooked how simple just asking questions. Why does this work the way it does? Does it work? Why do you do it that way? This is a basic exercise that I think really gets at where's the value, again, from the buyer's perspective. So those processes that I think we see most common, there's a market approach. Market approach is one in which we look at corresponding transactions in the environment. Can be really helpful. Sometimes it's also hard to find a representative transaction or a comparable company. The market approach is looking for some sort of comp.
So is that like if I go to sell my house, my realtor will pull comps on houses that have sold recently and value my house according to that?
It is, and I may have some issues in that example. I have a hard time finding comps for my house. That's been my experience. So it is fairly easy to understand, though. That approach is pretty straightforward. It appears less subjective. You're looking at what's happened. It's fairly real time. This sale did just occur. Can give us some price discovery. But not always can we find comparable transactions. So it is certainly limited by how comparable something is. That's subjective. Another approach is the income approach, simply valuing what is that stream of income discounted by the cost of acquiring it. It could be discounted by a risk rate, discounted by the time for which that might be realized. Sometimes it's really limited by a single period. When you say, what's a limit? What do you think the limitation is of a single period income valuation?
Well, to me, it'd be that there's no track record of consistency. If you're using the income approach, you're basically valuing the company like a bond. So you're going to try to discount the future cash flows of the business back to the present day and give it a value based on that. But if you only have one period that you can value it from, then there's no track record to base any future performance on. They may have had just one great year.
So you're saying just last year isn't enough necessarily? Last year's
No,
performance?
sir. No, sir. Last year is not enough.
Well, and in single period, there's some element of speculation, right?
Absolutely.
If I'm valuing based on what has happened, I would be buying it forward looking, wouldn't I?
You would. You
So-
would.
Somewhat speculative.
And we'll get into some of the different components of valuation that can help out a company that is, only has 1 year worth of performance, a little bit later. But what you said there were 3?
I think the last and perhaps the simplest is the asset approach. Looking at a business's net assets, the fair market value of those assets, maybe even the book value. But that asset approach is fairly simple in that it simply says, what is the equity? What's the equity of this business?
Mm-hmm.
And nets that out. And that can be variously applied. But it can be probably one of the best applications is a company that doesn't have much income. Maybe you caught it in a single period where the income is low or dwindling. It's a different valuation method that might capture the true value to a buyer
Okay.
better. So an important question, I think, would be how can management influence the value? Might be the most important question.
Well, and I would say that we alluded to this a little bit earlier, that management can affect the value of their company by looking at the different components of valuation. So you can break the components down into 2 categories. There are value detractors, which are going to increase the risk of the investment, and then value promoters, which are going to increase the sustainability and the long-term viability of that company and make a potential investor or potential buyer look at that and say, that is a good investment because there is some surety of a long-term performance. So in the area of value promoters, we're looking at things like stable experience management team, proprietary assets or processes, long-term contracts with your customers, potentially a large database of customer data with backgrounds, or if you have a very unique location. Some value detractors would be a high variability in either your expenses or your income. Then if you have a business that is dependent upon one person, that business is honestly not worth very much, because if that person goes away, then your business goes away.
How often would you say we run into that? Key man risk.
I would say that we run into that with small to mid-sized businesses quite often, because a business has been built on a founder who was an excellent technician at what that business does.
And all their relationships.
And their relationships, exactly. And they manage all the relationships and supervise most of the work. And if they go, the business goes. And that leads directly into the lack of process and automation, which is another value detractor. If you haven't built a business in a systematic way, so there's a system, then there's not really much for a buyer to buy except a job. There's not a lot of people I know who want to buy a job.
I'm not sure if you're getting at this, but I think you might be. It's helpful to understand these components of value long in advance of a formal valuation or a transaction. Would you say that's correct?
Absolutely. There are valuation, if there is any contemplation of the company being, even a portion of it being sold off, or entering into a partnership arrangement where the value needs to be known, then it's good to look at, from a management's perspective, it's good to look at these components of valuation well in advance of that happening, just so that when you go to the point where you're ready to go to market, that your business is set up in a way that you've minimized your value detractors as much as you can and maximized your value promoters.
I think you just highlighted the number one arbiter of value, which is really the market. We can discuss all these different drivers, but our focus for sure at Mid-America is helping clients understand what these drivers and detractors are before they go to market. The market, meaning willing buyers and sellers, ultimately will decide what that transaction value is. But understanding those component parts in advance has a lot to do with how that value is perceived. You can understand the pros and cons of your business and tweak them, improve them over time, so that you have when you have an unsolicited offer to buy your business, or there's some change that necessitates selling the business, it's less of a jerky operation to try to figure out how would this business be valued. So this is something that we regularly do with our clients, and you don't all necessarily need to be standing on the edge of a pending transaction. I think understanding value drivers today is something that we do oftentimes help clients right as they're ready to work on a transaction, but working on it today is important. If you have questions, further questions that we haven't covered here on what drives value, on what detracts value, on different valuation methods, we would love to help you. Please give us a call. We would be glad to visit with you more in depth and more specifically on your business.